The airport was already crowded before sunrise. Bright white lights reflected off the shiny floor, and rolling suitcases made a constant humming sound across the terminal. People rushed in every direction, some excited for vacations, others tired from business trips. In the middle of all that noise, a single father stood quietly near the boarding gate, holding his young daughter's small backpack in one hand and their boarding passes in the other. He looked like any other traveler. Simple jeans, plain dark jacket, comfortable shoes that had clearly seen better days. There was nothing about him that made people look twice. His daughter, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stood close to him, holding onto the side of his jacket as if she was afraid the crowd might carry her away. He bent down and fixed the strap on her backpack. "Stay close, okay?" he said softly. She nodded. "I will." Her voice was small, but her eyes were bright. She trusted him completely. When boarding was announced, the line formed quickly. People checked their phones, adjusted their bags, and sighed impatiently. The father and daughter waited until most of the line had moved forward before stepping in. He was never in a rush. He moved with calm patience, like someone who had learned not to waste energy on small frustrations. As they stepped onto the plane, a flight attendant greeted them with a polite smile. The father returned it with a respectful nod. He checked their seat numbers again. 8A and 8B, he murmured. They walked down the narrow aisle. A few passengers glanced at them and then looked away. One man sitting across the aisle frowned slightly when he saw the child. "Hope she doesn't cry the whole flight." The man muttered under his breath. The father heard it. He always heard those comments. But he didn't react. He simply guided his daughter to the window seat. "That's yours," he said gently. Her face lit up. "Really? I can see the clouds." "All of them," he replied. She climbed into seat 8A by the window, pressing her palms against the glass. He took the aisle seat beside her. He carefully placed her small bag under the seat and double-checked her seatbelt. "Too tight?" he asked. She shook her head. He then pulled a small folded sweater from his bag and placed it on her lap, in case you get cold. "You always think of everything," she said proudly. He smiled at that, but his eyes showed something deeper. Not pride, not even happiness. Just quiet responsibility. The plane doors closed. The safety demonstration began. The engine started to roar softly. His daughter watched everything with curiosity. He watched her. As the plane began to move, she reached for his hand. He held it firmly. "Are you scared?" she whispered. "No," he said calmly. "Are you?" She thought for a moment. "A little." "That's okay," he said. "Just breathe. I'm right here." The plane lifted off the ground smoothly. The city below grew smaller and smaller until it looked like a toy world. His daughter gasped in amazement. "Daddy, look, the cars look tiny." "I see them," he said. For the first 15 minutes, she kept talking about the clouds, the sky, the way the sunlight looked above everything. He listened carefully to every word. He never interrupted her excitement. Even when she repeated herself, he nodded like it was the first time he was hearing it. Eventually, the cabin grew quieter. The seatbelt sign turned off. Some passengers opened laptops. Others put on headphones. The man across the aisle glanced again at the child, as if waiting for her to become a problem. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned against her father's arm. "Can I rest a little?" she asked. "Of course." He adjusted the small sweater behind her head to make a pillow. She curled up beside him. Within minutes, her breathing slowed. Only then did his shoulders finally relax. It was clear he was tired, deeply tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from one bad night of sleep, the kind that builds up over years. There were faint lines under his eyes. His hands, though steady, showed signs of hard work. He closed his eyes for a moment, but did not sleep. Not yet. First, he looked around the cabin. He noticed who was seated nearby. He checked the exits automatically without thinking. He observed the flight attendants moving through the aisle. It was subtle, almost invisible. Then he looked back at his daughter. His expression softened completely. He gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. He made sure her seatbelt was still secure. He shifted slightly so his body formed a protective barrier between her and the aisle. Only after all of that did he finally lean his head back. Across the aisle, the impatient passenger watched him. He expected noise. He expected trouble. He expected chaos. Instead, he saw something else. He saw a man who looked like he carried the weight of the world quietly. A man who didn't complain. A man who seemed used to doing everything alone. The flight continued smoothly. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A soft hum filled the air. The father drifted into sleep. But even in sleep, his hand rested lightly on his daughter's arm. A flight attendant passed by and paused for a second. She noticed the child sleeping peacefully and the father's protective posture. She smiled faintly before moving on. About an hour into flight, light turbulence shook the plane. Nothing serious, just a few bumps. Some passengers gasped softly. The father's eyes opened immediately. Not confused, not startled, just alert. He looked out the window briefly, then toward the aisle, then up toward the cabin ceiling. His breathing remained steady. He gently tightened his arm around his daughter so she wouldn't wake up frightened. The turbulence passed. He stayed awake after that. His daughter shifted slightly and opened her eyes. "Are we okay?" she asked sleepily. "We're okay," he said. She looked at him carefully, as if studying his face. "You're not scared of flying," she said. He smiled lightly. "No." "Why?" He paused. "Because I trust the people up front," he answered simply. She seemed satisfied with that. She yawned and rested her head against him again. The man across the aisle finally spoke, this time not in a whisper. "First time flying with her?" he asked. The father turned his head politely. "No," he replied. "Traveling far." "A little," he said. The conversation ended there. The father was not rude, just reserved. He wasn't the type to offer his story to strangers. But there were small signs that his life had not been easy. The way he checked his phone briefly, staring at a single photo before locking the screen. The way he carefully counted the snacks in his bag before giving one to his daughter later. The way he stretched his neck slowly, like someone used long hours of focus. At one point, his daughter woke again and looked up at him. "Daddy." "Yes." "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you." He blinked in surprise. "Why do you think I'm brave?" She shrugged slightly. "Because you always look calm, even when things are hard." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kissed the top of her head. "Being calm doesn't mean you're not scared," he said quietly. "It just means you don't let fear decide what you do." She thought about that seriously, like it was the most important lesson she had ever heard. Outside the window, the sky stretched endlessly in soft shades of blue and white. Inside seat 8A, a simple father and his daughter sat quietly together, unnoticed by most of the cabin. No one knew where they were coming from. No one knew what they had been through. No one knew what the man had done before he became just dad. To everyone else, he was simply a tired single parent trying to make it through another flight. But there was something about the way he observed everything. The way he reacted to turbulence without panic. The way his eyes scanned the cabin without drawing attention. It was the kind of awareness that doesn't disappear easily. Eventually, his daughter fell asleep once more. This time, he allowed himself to close his eyes again. The soft hum of the engines filled the silence. Seat 8A looked peaceful, ordinary, unremarkable. No one on that plane could have guessed that the quiet man resting by the window was carrying more than just a backpack and a child's sweater. For now, he was just a father, and that was the only role that mattered to him. The plane had been in the air for nearly an hour when the first signs of trouble appeared. At first, it was subtle, a slight vibration, a gentle rattle through the seats. Passengers glanced around, adjusting their belts, unsure if it was normal. The overhead lights flickered for a moment, then returned to their soft glow. The father sitting in seat 8A immediately opened his eyes, his hand still lightly resting on his daughter's arm. He didn't speak, didn't panic. He just watched. His daughter stirred, half asleep. "Daddy?" she whispered, clutching the sweater around her shoulders. "I'm here," he said calmly. "Just a little bump. Nothing to worry about." But he was already analyzing the situation in his mind. Turbulence often passed quickly, but sometimes it was a sign of a larger problem. He quietly noticed the reactions of the flight attendants. One woman gripped the rail of a nearby seat, her knuckles white, her eyes scanning the cabin. Another moved to the cockpit door, glancing back at passengers nervously. Something was off, though most people remained unaware. A sudden chime interrupted the hum of the engines. The captain's voice came over the speaker, calm but with an underlying tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor technical issue. All passengers, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin." The words were polite, but the father knew better than to take them lightly. His military instincts, long set aside for civilian life, kicked in. He scanned the cabin silently, noting each exit, each passenger, each potential hazard. The daughter stirred again, sensing her father's shift in attention, but she didn't cry. She trusted him implicitly. Another chime sounded, and the captain's voice returned. This time it was direct, requesting any certified combat pilots on board to please identify themselves. "Your assistance may be required in the cockpit." The cabin went silent. Phones stopped vibrating. Conversations froze mid-word. Passengers turned to look at each other, confusion spreading across the faces of those who didn't know what a combat pilot could even do. A few nervous laughs broke the tension, but the father in seat 8A recognized the urgency immediately. His daughter rubbed her eyes sleepily. "Daddy, did they mean you?" she asked softly, not wanting to disturb anyone else. He nodded subtly. "I think so." He stood, careful not to startle her, and adjusted the strap of her backpack before lifting her into his arms. Some passengers watched, their curiosity mixed with disbelief. They saw a tired single dad carrying a child, not a soldier ready for action. He gave no explanation, no announcement. He simply moved down the aisle with purpose, his movements precise and calm. When he reached the cockpit, the flight attendants were tense. The door opened to reveal the co-pilot sweating, looking overwhelmed, and the captain who looked both relieved and worried. The father introduced himself quietly but firmly. "I'm a certified combat pilot," he said simply. The captain raised an eyebrow, assessing him quickly. The father produced his credentials. He didn't boast. There was no sense of arrogance, just an efficiency honed from years of experience. Without wasting another second, he stepped into the cockpit. The door closed behind him. The hum of conversation in the cabin diminished as passengers whispered among themselves, wondering who this man was. Inside the cockpit, the father's focus was immediate. He scanned the instruments, noted the plane's altitude, speed, and the minor technical warnings that blinked intermittently on the dashboard. He spoke calmly to the captain, requesting small adjustments, confirming readings. His hands moved with certainty, almost like they remembered patterns they had practiced countless times in the past. The captain leaned back, studying him closely. "You haven't flown a commercial plane before?" "I have training on similar systems." "I can assist," he replied. No one needed more explanation. In moments like this, competence mattered more than experience with commercial aircraft. He was a pilot. He knew what to do when things went wrong. Back in the cabin, passengers began to notice a change. The turbulence had worsened slightly, but there was a subtle sense of calm. Those who had been panicked started to settle, reassured by the captain's composed voice and the smooth corrections of the aircraft's movement. Few realized that the calmness came not just from the cockpit, but from a single man quietly guiding them. The daughter sat quietly, still held in her father's arms. She peeked up at him, seeing the intensity in his eyes. She didn't understand the technical details, but she felt the seriousness, the sense that he was protecting everyone on board. Her small fingers gripped his jacket as if anchoring herself to safety. Minutes passed. The father guided the captain through the adjustments needed. He identified a minor hydraulic problem that could have escalated if ignored. He made small, precise commands, and the co-pilot responded without hesitation. The father's tone was calm, almost conversational, yet every word carried authority and knowledge. Flashbacks ran through his mind briefly. Nights spent in a cockpit in harsher conditions, missions that demanded split-second decisions. Watching the lives of those under his protection depend entirely on his skills. He had left that life behind, but now it had found him again in a civilian plane over clouds. One passenger in the back glanced toward the cockpit door, curious. "Who is that guy?" she whispered. Another shook his head. "Doesn't look like a pilot." Just some dad. They had no idea. As the plane stabilized, the turbulence subsided slightly. The father's focus shifted to the larger picture. The route, communication with air traffic control, and possible alternative landing options. He didn't let fear cloud his judgment. Each instruction he gave was precise, leaving nothing to chance. He glanced briefly at his daughter. She was asleep again, her head resting against his chest. He smiled faintly but didn't allow himself to relax. This was a moment where lives depended on clarity and calm. A few passengers noticed him returning to his seat, even briefly, to reassure his daughter. They watched a man who could have been any ordinary parent. Yet they sensed something more. The way he moved, the quiet confidence, the attention to detail. It all seemed different. Outside, the clouds moved swiftly, the sky alternating between pale blue and dark gray as the day progressed. The plane adjusted, tilting slightly, and the father kept his hands ready, eyes scanning the cockpit instruments and the cabin status simultaneously. His mind was sharp, trained for emergencies, yet gentle enough to maintain the sense of security for his child. Flight attendants moved quietly, checking on passengers, but they couldn't ignore the father's presence. They sensed he was someone who could handle whatever came next. No questions asked. Then another warning chime sounded. Minor but persistent. He immediately recognized the pattern. "Check the auxiliary hydraulics," he said to the co-pilot. His voice was calm, steady, and confident. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply directed. The co-pilot followed the instructions without hesitation, trusting the man's experience. Slowly, the indicators returned to normal. Relief, subtle but tangible, passed through the cockpit. Back in the cabin, murmurs grew. People began to exchange glances, sensing that the danger had lessened but unsure why. The father returned to seat 8A, lifting his daughter and settling her back into the window seat. He smoothed her hair gently and tucked the sweater around her shoulders. "Sleep well, okay?" he whispered. She nodded, still half asleep, comforted by the security of his presence. He leaned back in his seat, alert but calm. His eyes roamed the cabin once more, scanning for anything unusual. No one noticed the tiny flicker of tension that still ran through his muscles. He had been here before. He knew that small problems could grow if ignored, but he also knew that panic was far worse. Around him, passengers relaxed slightly, unaware of the extent of what had just occurred. Only he, and perhaps the captain, understood how close things had come to becoming serious. And yet, he didn't speak of it. He didn't seek recognition. His daughter's safety and comfort remained his priority. Hours passed, but the father maintained his quiet vigilance. Every move was measured, every decision carefully considered. And every so often, he looked out the window, checking the weather, the horizon, and the clouds, as though he could predict every twist the plane might take. Finally, the captain's voice came over the speaker once more, calmer now, but still firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing minor technical adjustments. We are under control. Thank you for your patience." Passengers let out soft sighs of relief. Some exchanged nervous smiles. The father, however, didn't relax. He simply shifted slightly to ensure his daughter remained comfortable. For her, he was just a protective dad. For the rest of the passengers, he was a quiet presence that somehow made everything feel safer. And for himself, he was a man who had once made life-and-death decisions, and now found that even in civilian skies, some instincts never left him. The plane flew on, steady but not entirely free of danger. And in seat 8A, the single father sat quietly, his daughter sleeping beside him, unaware of the world watching, trusting completely, and depending entirely on a man who had always known how to stay calm when everything else seemed uncertain. The father's hands rested lightly on the controls as he guided the plane through steadily choppy skies. Each adjustment was small but precise, almost invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. He spoke calmly to the captain, offering suggestions in a tone that was firm but reassuring. The cockpit was quiet except for the sound of the engines and the occasional click of a switch. Every movement he made was deliberate, born from years of practice and discipline. His mind briefly wandered to memories he rarely revisited. The early mornings when he had risen before dawn, flying missions that demanded every ounce of focus he had. The nights spent in planes that seemed to defy sleep, when the only thing keeping him alert was a responsibility for those who depended on him. The medals he had never displayed, the recognition he never sought, all of it seemed distant now, yet oddly connected to the present moment. The skills he had honed in war were now saving lives in a civilian aircraft miles above the clouds. Outside the window, the weather was unpredictable. Dark clouds swirled in patterns that seemed chaotic but had an underlying rhythm. Lightning flashed far in the distance, momentarily illuminating the interior of the cockpit. The father did not flinch. His eyes scanned instruments, weather patterns, and flight data simultaneously. Every instinct he had developed over years was active, alert, and ready. Back in the cabin, passengers were beginning to sense that something was different. The turbulence, which had caused murmurs and nervous glances earlier, was now met with a subtle calm. Some noticed the father returning briefly to seat 8A to reassure his daughter, and in that small action, the sense of safety grew. Others, unaware of his true identity, assumed it was just parental care, but the effect rippled through the cabin. Fear lessened, replaced by quiet attentiveness. The daughter stirred slightly, sensing the shift in energy. She looked up at her father, her eyes wide and curious. She did not fully understand what was happening, but she could feel the seriousness and calm emanating from him. She reached for his hand, and he took it firmly. "Don't worry," he whispered. "Everything is under control." She nodded, satisfied with the reassurance. Her small trust in him was absolute. The father turned his attention back to the cockpit. He had begun coordinating with air traffic control, requesting an alternate route to avoid the worst of the storm. His voice was steady, commands clear and precise. The captain watched him closely, realizing quickly that this man was not just competent but exceptional. Each decision was measured, logical, and informed by experience that went far beyond the standard commercial pilot training. Passengers in the back began to notice the subtle changes. The plane steadied despite the turbulent air. The flight attendants moved with increased confidence, guided by the calm emanating from the cockpit. Conversations quieted. Phones were checked less often. People began to relax, trusting the unseen presence guiding them. The father's focus was unwavering. He monitored the instruments, checked fuel levels, and recalculated landing options. His mind worked in multiple layers: technical details, passenger safety, and the comfort of his daughter simultaneously. Even in high-stress situations, he had learned to compartmentalize, to handle emergencies without letting panic interfere. A brief silence fell in the cockpit. The co-pilot glanced at him, a question in his eyes. The father gestured toward a minor warning light. "Check the auxiliary systems," he said quietly. "It's minor, but it needs monitoring." The co-pilot obeyed, and the indicator returned to normal. Another crisis averted silently, without alarming the passengers. The father did not comment or celebrate. There was no ego here, no desire for recognition. His only concern was the safe journey of everyone on board. Meanwhile, in seat 8A, his daughter shifted again. "Daddy, are we going to land safely?" He smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Yes, we will. I promise." She nestled back against him, comforted by his presence. For her, the world was simple: safety in her father's arms. Minutes stretched into an hour. The father maintained vigilance, his eyes flicking between instruments and the cabin. Each passenger unaware of the subtle adjustments he made that kept the plane stable. Each flight attendant carrying out duties with confidence born from his quiet leadership. A flash of lightning outside momentarily lit the cabin. A few passengers gasped. The father's eyes flicked to the horizon, analyzing the storm's path. He made a few quick adjustments, and the plane smoothed. No one noticed the skill required for those subtle changes. Only he and the captain understood the precision involved. A memory surfaced briefly. His daughter's first day of school. He had held her hand tightly, promising protection and guidance. Now, high above the clouds, he kept the same promise in a different form. Not with words, but with actions. Every decision, every adjustment, was a continuation of the care he had always shown her. Passengers were beginning to sense that the danger had passed, though they did not understand how close they had come. A woman several rows back whispered to her companion, "I don't know why, but I feel calmer now." The companion nodded, eyes fixed on the cockpit door. Me too. Maybe it's just the way the crew is handling things. Little did they know, the father in seat 8A was the source of that calm. His presence, quiet and deliberate, had stabilized more than just the aircraft. The father adjusted the seatbelt around his daughter, making sure she was comfortable. He looked around the cabin subtly, noting anyone who appeared uneasy. With a few reassuring gestures and brief smiles, he conveyed a sense of safety without saying a word. Hours passed with careful monitoring. He coordinated with air traffic control, calculating potential routes and weather patterns. He offered suggestions for the landing approach, always speaking in measured tones, never raising his voice unnecessarily. The captain followed his guidance, impressed by the precision and clarity of his instructions. His daughter, sensing the extended calm, finally fell asleep fully against him. He allowed himself a brief moment to relax, though his vigilance never wavered entirely. He knew emergencies could appear suddenly, without warning. A passenger sitting nearby watched him. Curiosity now mingled with admiration. "Who is that man?" she asked softly to no one in particular. Another passenger shrugged. "Just a dad, I guess. But he seems different." Different indeed. Not in appearance, but in presence. In the subtle authority and calm that drew confidence from everyone around him. The storm outside began to subside slightly. Rain fell in steady sheets, and dark clouds began to thin. The father monitored each change, adjusting the plane's altitude and speed. He calculated the safest path to the nearest airport capable of handling the flight if necessary. Every decision was informed, deliberate, and unflustered. He looked down at the sleeping girl, her small hand resting on his arm. She was unaware of the storm, the turbulence, the warnings. All she knew was safety in his arms. And for him, that was enough motivation to continue, to maintain focus, to ensure everyone on board arrived safely. The co-pilot occasionally glanced at him, noting the calm efficiency with which he managed every aspect of the flight. Questions went unspoken because the father's confidence conveyed everything necessary. Each adjustment, each instruction, reassured the crew and passengers alike. Time seemed to stretch, measured only by the soft hum of engines and the occasional click of instruments. The father's attention never wavered, and yet he managed to maintain a gentle presence, a comfort to his daughter who slept peacefully beside him. Finally, the captain's voice came over the speaker, steady and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are navigating through minor turbulence. Everything is under control, and we appreciate your patience." Passengers relaxed further, unaware that the calm they felt was a result of one man's silent vigilance. They saw only the plane moving smoothly, the crew performing their duties efficiently. The father returned to his seat fully now, making sure his daughter was secure. He allowed himself a faint smile, knowing that for the moment, the crisis had passed. Outside, the clouds were thinning, revealing patches of sky. The storm that had seemed threatening earlier now appeared distant. Inside seat 8A, the father held his daughter close, her breathing steady and calm. The plane continued its journey, guided by hands that had long known how to remain steady when the world around them seemed unpredictable. For the passengers, the flight continued uneventfully. For the father, every detail mattered. The instruments, the crew, the comfort of each passenger, and the safety of his daughter. Every skill he had acquired over years of demanding experience was in use, yet unnoticed by most. And that was exactly the way he wanted it. As the plane flew on, he allowed himself to think briefly of what life had brought him here. A single father, carrying the weight of responsibility, navigating a storm both literal and figurative. He had trained for crises before, but this was different. This was personal. His daughter depended on him. And in guiding the plane safely, he was protecting more than just strangers. He was ensuring the world outside the cockpit remained a place where she could grow up safe and secure. And so, the hours passed. The storm slowly eased. The plane flew steadily toward its destination. And in seat 8A, a single father and his sleeping daughter remained a quiet center calm, unaware of the admiration and quiet awe that surrounded them. For now, all that mattered was safety, presence, and the steady assurance that he was there, always ready, always vigilant, always a father first. The father in seat 8A remained fully alert as the plane began its descent toward the destination airport. The weather outside was still unpredictable, with gusts of wind and intermittent rain. The instruments in the cockpit flashed gently, reminding him of the delicate balance between altitude, speed, and safety. Every calculation had to be exact, every command precise. Lives depended on it. The co-pilot glanced at him nervously. "We're approaching a strong crosswind," he said quietly. The father nodded, his hands steady on the controls. "We can manage it. Maintain current angle and prepare for slight corrections," he instructed. He adjusted a small lever and guided the plane with careful precision. The engines responded. The wings tilted gently, and the cabin hummed with controlled stability. In the back, passengers clutched their armrests, their eyes wide as the plane rocked slightly. The father's voice came over the intercom, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some wind conditions during our approach. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control." The effect was immediate. People relaxed a little, reassured by the calm tone and confident delivery. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by the subtle authority behind the words. His daughter, now awake, peeked at him from seat 8A. "Daddy, it's windy," she said, her small voice tinged with worry. "It is," he said gently, "but we're safe. I'm right here." She seemed satisfied with that answer and leaned her head against the window, watching the clouds swirl. He smiled briefly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. In her eyes, he saw trust and innocence. That trust strengthened his resolve. The captain, sitting beside him, followed the father's guidance meticulously. Every adjustment, every recalibration was executed without hesitation. The father's experience and focus inspired confidence in everyone who was aware of the situation. Yet he made no announcements of heroism, no demonstrations of skill. He simply did what was necessary, quietly and efficiently. The plane tilted slightly as it encountered another gust of wind. The father adjusted the controls subtly, guiding the craft like a steady hand on a delicate instrument. The passengers felt the movement, but did not panic. The rhythm of the plane had changed from erratic to controlled, almost gentle, as if the aircraft were floating instead of struggling. He glanced briefly at his daughter. She was gripping her father's arm slightly, sensing the tension but trusting him completely. He gave her a reassuring smile. "Almost there," he whispered. "Just a little longer." Outside, the clouds parted slightly, revealing glimpses of the runway below. Rain fell in streaks, making the landing more challenging. He adjusted the plane's descent angle, calculating the optimal speed for a safe touchdown. Each second mattered. Each decision required precision. Passengers were quiet now, sensing the seriousness of the situation. Some whispered prayers. Others held their loved ones tightly. None of them realized that the calm they felt was a direct result of the father's experience and focused attention. His presence, quiet and steady, radiated control. The co-pilot followed his lead, trusting the father's instincts. "Adjusting flaps," he said. "Good," the father replied. "Keep an eye on airspeed and wind shear indicators." Minor adjustments only. A flash of lightning illuminated the cockpit. Rain lashed against the windows. The father's eyes scanned the instruments. Every reading was absorbed instantly, analyzed, and acted upon with careful efficiency. He made small corrections, smoothing out the descent without alarming passengers. In the cabin, the hum of anxious whispers persisted. A mother across the aisle murmured to her child, "Stay calm, it's okay." Her words were faint, almost drowned by the engine's roar. The father, seated in 8A, remained focused on the cockpit, but his presence was enough to comfort the child beside him. Minutes felt like hours as the plane approached the runway. The crosswinds intensified briefly. The father made rapid but controlled adjustments. Each movement of the controls was precise, calculated. He had flown through worse, but this was different. This was civilian passengers, people who were unaware of the technical danger. Their safety rested entirely in his hands. He adjusted the throttle slightly, aligning the plane perfectly with the runway. Rain slicked the tarmac, but the descent was smooth. He kept a steady hand, guiding the aircraft down gently. The wheels touched the runway with a soft jolt, followed by a smooth roll. The passengers exhaled collectively, some crying softly in relief. The plane decelerated safely, guided by skilled hands that had seen far more extreme conditions. The father remained alert, ensuring the plane slowed completely before signaling the co-pilot to taxi toward the gate. Emergency crews watched from a distance, ready but unnecessary. The crisis had been managed silently, efficiently, and without drama. As the plane came to a full stop, the cabin lights brightened. The intercom crackled to life with the captain's voice, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have safely landed. Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop at the gate." Passengers murmured among themselves, many unaware of the severity of what had just occurred. Their relief was palpable, their gratitude quiet but sincere. The father adjusted his daughter in her seat, ensuring she remained comfortable and secure. He whispered softly to her, "See? I told you we'd be okay." She smiled sleepily. "You were right, Daddy," she said. Her faith in him had never wavered, even for a moment. A flight attendant approached, offering assistance to disembarking passengers. She paused briefly at seat 8A, noticing the father's calm demeanor and his gentle care for his daughter. A small smile crossed her face. She understood, in that moment, the quiet heroism of the man seated there. The passengers began to gather their belongings, some exchanging whispers of awe and relief. A few glanced toward the cockpit, now empty, and then toward seat 8A, sensing that something extraordinary had occurred. They didn't know the details, but they could feel the gravity of the situation. The father lifted his daughter, carrying her carefully toward the exit. She clutched his jacket, trusting him completely. As they walked down the aisle, passengers looked on, some offering quiet nods of gratitude. He acknowledged them with polite, understated gestures. No words were needed. Outside the plane, the rain had slowed, and the air was fresh with the scent of wet tarmac. The father adjusted the strap of his daughter's backpack and held her hand tightly. Together, they walked toward the terminal, unnoticed by most, yet leaving a subtle impression on those who had observed them. The experience had left the father reflective. He had managed a crisis with calm and efficiency, relying on skills honed through years of training and life experience. Yet for him, the true priority had always been his daughter's safety and comfort. That remained unchanged. Inside the terminal, passengers disembarked quietly. Some approached crew members, asking about the unusual calm during turbulence. Others whispered to one another, amazed by the plane's smooth handling. Few could comprehend that the man in seat 8A had been the guiding force, the quiet presence ensuring safety and calm. The father guided his daughter through the airport, helping her navigate the crowd. He kept her close, adjusting her hat and backpack, ensuring she remained comfortable and secure. To her, he was simply Dad, the protector who had kept her safe. To the rest of the world, he was an ordinary traveler who had carried himself with dignity and grace. He paused briefly near the baggage claim, checking their tickets and the carousel. Everything was normal now, calm and safe. His daughter yawned, tired but happy. He smiled, brushing a lock of hair from her face. The journey had been challenging, but they had emerged unscathed. Passengers who had witnessed parts of the flight carried subtle admiration in their expressions. They didn't know the details, but they sensed the presence of someone extraordinary. Quietly, without fanfare, he had managed a complex situation with skill, patience, and unwavering focus. The father looked down at his daughter. She yawned again, leaning against him. "Daddy, we made it," she murmured. "Yes, we did," he said, smiling faintly. Safe and sound. As they stepped away from the terminal doors into the soft evening light, the father reflected on the journey. He had navigated turbulence, uncertainty, and danger. He had protected his daughter and ensured the safety of everyone aboard. And yet, he remained humble, quiet, and focused on what mattered most, the well-being of the child beside him. The airport buzzed with activity around them. But for the father and his daughter, a sense of calm prevailed. The storm had passed, and the world seemed a little brighter, a little safer. And in that moment, the father knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would meet them with the same quiet strength, the same unwavering focus, and the same dedication to the person who mattered most in his life, his daughter. The plane had come to a complete stop at the gate, engines humming down to silence. Passengers waited patiently, still holding on to their seats, some whispering about the turbulence and the landing. Relief hung in the air like a soft breeze, and yet, for the father in seat 8A, the journey was not over. He gently lifted his daughter, brushing her hair back from her face, and whispered softly, "Let's go, sweetheart." She clung to his hand as they moved toward the exit. People were beginning to gather their belongings, glancing around the cabin. Some noticed a man carrying a small child, and there was a subtle sense of curiosity and admiration. They didn't know what had just occurred, but they could feel something extraordinary had passed to the cabin without fanfare. The flight attendants, who had seen the father guide the cockpit and the passengers indirectly through the crisis, exchanged quiet glances. One of them approached, giving a small, respectful nod. No words were exchanged. Words were unnecessary. His calm, steady presence had spoken for itself. As they walked down the aisle, a few passengers whispered, recognizing the quiet figure who had maintained composure, while others had feared the worst. Some tried to catch his eye, offering nods and smiles of gratitude, but he remained focused on his daughter. She was small, tired, and oblivious of the fact that she had been part of a journey that could have turned dangerous without her father's presence. Outside the plane, the rain had mostly stopped, leaving the tarmac glistening under the airport lights. Emergency crews and ground staff move around, but none were needed beyond their usual procedures. The storm had passed, and the plane was safely docked. Passengers filed out quietly, murmuring thanks to the crew. The father adjusted the strap of his daughter's backpack, keeping her close. "Are you ready to get your feet on solid ground?" he asked. She smiled sleepily, nodding, "Yes, Daddy." They moved toward the terminal, the father guiding her carefully through the crowd. Each step was measured, ensuring her safety. Passengers who had noticed him now felt a subtle admiration. They didn't know the details, but they could sense the calm authority he carried, the quiet confidence that had permeated the flight. Inside the terminal, the buzz of activity continued. Families reunited, travelers hurrying to catch connecting flights, announcements over the loudspeakers. Life moved on as usual. But for the father, the focus remained on his daughter. He helped her navigate the bustling crowd, ensuring her comfort and safety, checking every step they took. At baggage claim, they waited quietly. He kept one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. She leaned against him, tired from the day's events, yet comforted by his presence. He whispered softly, reassuring her in gentle tones. "We made it. Everything is fine now." A few passengers who had been seated nearby approached the counter, exchanging whispers of astonishment. "Did you see that man in 8A?" one said quietly. "He was something else. So calm." Another nodded. "I don't know who he is, but he kept the flight steady. I've never seen anything like it." Meanwhile, the father gathered their luggage and kept an attentive eye on his daughter. She yawned again, her head resting briefly against his chest. "Daddy," she murmured, "thank you for keeping us safe." He smiled softly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "That's my job, sweetheart. Always." As they moved toward the exit of the airport, the night air was fresh and cool. The father held her hand firmly, her small fingers curling around his. They walked toward the waiting car, quietly, a sense of completion settling over him. The plane, the storm, and the tension behind them now existed only as memories. What mattered most was the safety of the child in his care. Once in the car, he buckled her in carefully, double-checking the straps. She looked up at him, her eyes bright despite her fatigue. "Daddy, everyone on the plane is okay?" "Yes," he said. "Everyone is safe, thanks to some teamwork and careful planning, just like we talked about." She smiled, comforted, and leaned back into her seat. He started the car, eyes scanning the road ahead while thoughts lingered in his mind. The flight had tested more than just technical skills. It had tested patience, vigilance, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. Yet through it all, his primary responsibility remained constant, keeping his daughter safe and reassured. The car moved smoothly through the quiet streets. He glanced at his daughter in the rear-view mirror. She was watching the city lights, her hand still resting on his arm, trusting completely. He allowed himself a small sigh of relief. For him, the relief was quiet, private, and personal. He thought about the passengers, strangers who had unknowingly depended on him. Most would never know the full story. They would remember the smooth ride, the calm voice over the intercom, and perhaps the quiet presence of a man seated in 8A. But no one would know the details, the precision, or the experience that had ensured their safety. He didn't need them to know. He had acted because it was necessary, not for recognition. The night passed gently as they drove home. His daughter eventually drifted into sleep, leaning slightly against a window. He watched her face, illuminated softly by passing streetlights. In her peaceful expression, he found a deep sense of fulfillment. All the worry, all the attention, all the planning. It had been worth it for this moment. Arriving home, he carried her inside, still asleep, and placed her gently in bed. He adjusted the blankets around her, ensuring comfort. He stayed for a moment, watching her breathe steadily, the rhythm of sleep peaceful and undisturbed. For him, this was a reward, the knowledge that she was safe, warm, and secure. He stepped back, reflecting quietly on the day. The flight, the storm, and the challenge of guiding the aircraft safely were behind him. Yet he knew that life would continue to demand vigilance, patience, and calm decision-making. What mattered most, however, would always be the simple, human moments, the protection, care, and love for his daughter. The next morning, the news of the storm and the turbulence would appear on local stations and online feeds. Passengers might recount their stories, describing the smooth landing and the calm handling of the flight. Yet few would know the truth behind the calm voice and steady hands. The quiet hero seated in 8A, a single father ensuring that every life on board was safe, while his daughter slept peacefully beside him. For the father, there was no need for applause or recognition. His actions spoke quietly in every small detail. The way he held his daughter's hand, the calmness of his voice, the careful attention to every instrument and passenger. Heroism, in his view, was silent and measured, guided by responsibility and love rather than desire for praise. He sat for a moment at the kitchen table, reflecting. Life was unpredictable, sometimes chaotic, but moment of calm, of control, and of safety mattered most. He thought of the passengers, the crew, and most importantly, his daughter. She would grow up safe, guided by the lessons of quiet vigilance, careful decisions, and unwavering care. Later that day, he and his daughter went outside, enjoying the fresh air, the sense of relief, and the simple pleasures of life that too often went unnoticed. For her, the world was simple and safe. For him, every challenge faced, every decision made, had ensured that simplicity remained intact. The flight had been more than a journey from one city to another. It had been a test of calm, courage, and care. The father had risen to the occasion without fuss or drama, and though the world might never know the details, he had fulfilled his most important role, the protector, the guide, and the unwavering presence in his daughter's life. Even as the days passed, the memory of that flight remained quiet and private, a story shared only between him and his daughter. They had emerged safely, stronger, and closer than ever. And for the father in seat 8A, that was all that truly mattered. The world could continue unaware, and he would continue to fulfill his duties silently, humbly, and with love, always prioritizing the safety and happiness of the child who depended on him most. As they walked home hand in hand, the father glanced at his daughter one last time before the door closed behind them. She looked up at him, smiling faintly. "Daddy, thank you for today," she whispered. He knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and smiled softly. "Always, sweetheart, always." And with that, the father and his daughter stepped into their home, safe and whole, the quiet heroes of a story that would mostly go unnoticed, but one that would live forever in the hearts of the two who mattered most.